Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the reports of efforts by Kemi Badenoch to win back big spending donors from Reform UK. This is important for her because without the money, she will be going into every election campaign blind. But what is she up against, and how can she work out a plan to win the money back? But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, apparently Kemi Badenoch was at a conference in London yesterday where wealthy party donors had been invited for a drinky-do. The Guardian reported that Conservative HQ is worried that a lot of important donors are vulnerable to switching to Reform UK, that a lot of them have already sort of turned off their donations to the Conservatives. Now, let's just think about the context here. So in the UK, there are limits on the amount of money political groups are allowed to spend on the year leading up to a general election. Rishi Sunak changed the law to significantly boost the amount of money political parties are allowed to spend. Now, the justification was that he was just bringing it in line with inflation, which was fair enough. However, he accidentally forgot to boost the amount that non-partisan groups could spend, which is not remotely fair enough. What Sunak was trying to do was give his party an advantage. The Conservatives had just inherited a £10 million donation in a will, and they were looking a bit flush. However, the donations dried up a bit after that as Sunak's policy backfired. There were times during the election campaign when the Conservatives suspended all social media advertising because they were running out of money. This was the reality facing the Conservatives last summer. They'd raised the cap on what political parties could spend, and then they couldn't afford to meet that cap themselves. Sunak's final error. And this would be a bad enough legacy for Badenoch to take over. Out of power, deeply unpopular, donors, of course, are likely to be hesitant about throwing their money away unless they think the Conservatives can use it to whip themselves back into shape. There will be some donors who say, look, we know they're not going to win the next election, but we need to keep the money in so that they can rebuild, so that they can eventually get back into power. Problem is, things are worse now. For those same donors, it's no longer a choice between giving the Tories money to rebuild or just keeping it and hibernating a bit while Labour burn themselves out like last time. They have the option of instead giving the money to Reform UK. Now, as I discussed again in the stream last night, Reform UK's polling is not an indication that they're heading for power at all. Quite the reverse. The current polling situation has been seen twice in my lifetime, where voters flock to a third option at a particular point where both the government and the main opposition are not that popular, and in both the previous two cases, they flocked right back to the party of government at the next election and delivered a large majority to them. And although things can change, there's no reason to suppose the same won't happen this time. But how many Tory donors pay attention to political polling and election history? If they think Reform UK can build a MAGA-like movement in the UK, and they see the same success, well, it's their perception which matters, not reality. The Tories are not going to win back public trust for the next election. But what if Reform UK can? Never mind winning back voters, the Tories have to first consolidate and win back donors. The Conservatives who experienced the previous big loss in 1997 said they struggled for the first few years because they couldn't afford to pay for detailed polling and data analysis. It meant that they were flying blind when it came to strategy. They were unable to identify their key target voters or what it was they thought or wanted. That sort of information is vital for a modern election campaign. You need to know who your key voters are, where they are, what they think about key issues, what they want, what are their limits. And all this information is expensive. So Badenoch is now going through what William Hague went through last time. But what does she have to do to persuade donors to stick with the Conservatives? Well, first of all, we have to think about what these donors want. Why do they part with their cash in the first place? I would say there are two broad reasons for why a Conservative Party donor might switch to Reform UK. First, they're not donating for a government as such. They just want to get a party to promote the talking points they'd like amplifying in order to try and shift public opinion. If they've gone to Reform, it's because they think Farage either has as much reach as Badenoch or the Tories won't back their narrative. So for donors who just want to buy a mouthpiece, Farage is very good value for money. He gets himself on the telly a lot. He will be more than happy to push the lines that donors want. Remember, even ordinary members of the public could pay him a few quid to jump out from behind a tree to wish them a happy birthday. I was offered that he would do a video promoting my channel for a few quid a few years ago. It's also why I think he's promoting the idea of privatising the NHS, despite this being unpopular with his target voters. I've no doubt he wants it personally, but that's not a reason to openly talk about it if it is a problem for his electoral strategy. He's talking about it in public, I think, because it's what those donors want to hear. I don't think Badenoch is prepared to go as far as Farage, and what she says doesn't get amplified as much as Farage anyway. So I actually think Nigel Farage has got more reach than Badenoch in the media right now. So what does Badenoch do about that? Auction policies off? She said she won't be announcing detailed policies just yet. Is that because she's selling them off? Biggest donors get to pull a government department out of the hat and decide its party's policies? Second possibility is that these donors do want to use their donations to build the next government, but they believe Reform are in a good position to do that, either outright or in partnership with the Conservatives. Now, to get these donors back, Badenoch would need to persuade them that she can win the election, but Reform cannot, and can only make a continued Labour government more likely by backing them. Now, that's tricky because Reform UK are now polling ahead of the Conservatives across all pollsters, including the credible ones. Unless Badenoch can get the Conservatives polling back ahead of Reform UK, she cannot hope to win this argument either. And as I've said before, how does she get the Tory polling moving back upwards? Well, she needs policies which appeal to voters. But she's refusing to announce any detailed policies, and the vague policies which she's announced are not exactly popular. Less state pension for those who are better off, which is mostly their elderly voters. Wanting to block lower trade barriers with the EU, which is not popular with business owners. And promising to reverse workers' rights for the rest of her voters. How is the Tory polling going to recover under these circumstances? And if in the next year Reform UK, let's say they start to poll ahead of Labour, even with credible pollsters, I mean, that's obviously bad for Labour because their MPs in some ways are as thick as the Tories and don't understand polling either. Some are already panicking because they didn't watch my stream last night. But it would be worse still for the Tories, ironically, because then donors would be more likely to think Reform could win power at the next election, even if in coalition with the Tories. And because Reform UK are willing to go further than the Tories in terms of policies which benefit the super wealthy, because they don't have to worry about too many votes around the centre other than the racist vote. They can donate to Reform UK to make sure the next right-wing government is very Trump-like in its attitude towards the benefits of oligarchy. Which is brilliant because big Tory donors would love to be oligarchs. So the situation the Tories find themselves in is this. They've never experienced such a poor rate of donations. Without these donations, they cannot afford the information they need to rebuild. They need to persuade donors not to switch to Reform UK, but Reform UK are being talked about more in the news than the Tories in many ways, and they are polling ahead of the Conservatives. Badenoch shows no signs of presenting policies to the public just yet, which means there is no way the party's polling can improve unless an absolute load of voters just randomly decides to go back to them for no reason, which would be weird. Badenoch could try Starmer's tactic, just be a serious, calm voice in turbulent political times while she works on the detailed policies, but she has instead opted to say sandwiches aren't real and anyone who has anything other than a steak or nothing for lunch is a wimp. Going to be honest, I'm not sure organising drinks with the Tory leader is going to do a lot to bring in the mega donations for the Tories in the foreseeable future. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.